Good evening, everyone. My name is Connie Langoven, and I'm a board member of Not in Our Town, Princeton, and I'm happy to welcome you to Not in Our Town's continuing conversation on race and white privilege. We are hosted by the Princeton Public Library, which has been our steadfast partner in Not in Our Town's work for years. This presentation is being live streamed and recorded. Since its inception, Not in Our Town Princeton has held events to educate and raise community awareness of continuing racism and to promote activities to combat it. For over a decade, Not in Our Town's continuing conversations have taken place on the first non-holiday Monday of each month to provide the opportunity for people from different backgrounds to hear speakers and to talk to each other about race-related topics. We'd like to begin by sharing this land acknowledgement. The land on which we are living is part of the ancient homeland and traditional territory of Lenni Lenape people. We pay respect to the Lenni Lenape people past, present, and future, and their continuing presence in their homeland and in the diaspora. We also acknowledge the millions of enslaved Africans and their descendants on whose backs this nation was created. We'd also like to share Not in Our Town Princeton's mission statement. Not in Our Town Princeton is a multiracial, multi-faith group of individuals who stand together for racial justice and inclusive communities. Our focus is to promote the equitable treatment of all and to uncover and confront white supremacy, the system that facilitates the preference, privilege, and power of white people at the expense of non-white people and pits racial and ethnic groups against each other by upholding hierarchies based on our proximity to whiteness. Our goal is to identify and expose the political, economic, and cultural systems which have enabled white supremacy to flourish, and to create new structures and policies which will ensure equity and inclusion for all. In our commitment to uncovering the blight of white supremacy on our humanity, we take responsibility to address it and eliminate it in all its forms through intentional action, starting with ourselves and our communities. I'm honored to introduce tonight's speaker, Gayatri Sethi, PhD, who's an educator, writer, and independent consultant. She teaches and writes about social justice, global studies, and comparative education. Born in Tanzania and raised in Botswana, she's of Punjabi descent, multilingual, and polycultural. She reflects on these lifelong experiences of identity, immigration, and belonging in her debut nonfiction book, Unbelonging. She's also the co-founder of the Daisy Kidlit community, initiative to build solidarity among the South Asian diaspora writers for young people. You can learn more at gayatrisethi.com. Thank you, Gayatri. Look forward to hearing your remarks.
Thank you for this warm welcome, and welcome everyone who has, braved whatever forces to be here in this virtual space together. Whatever you had to do to be here today, thank you. Thank you for making time. Your time is such a precious thing, and thank you for sharing it with me. Connie and Not in Our Town, Princeton, I am just so enheartened by your mission and also by your invitation. So thank you. Thank you for having me. And thank you to Dr. Ruha Benjamin, who introduced me to Connie. And I know that she will join us later, but I wanted to begin with thank you, which, as Alice Walker says, is a prayer, and is a prayer dear to my heart. So thank you all. Thank you, Kim, for pulling up this presentation. So Connie and I decided that what we would do is an interactive reading of the book. The book is entitled Unbelonging. I am Gayatri. I go by she, her pronouns, and I'm speaking to you from sacred Muskogee Creek lands, known as Atlanta, Georgia. So I wanted to begin by reading a couple of excerpts that align with the mission statement that was read moments ago. So let me begin. I also wanted to offer some content warnings before I begin, that there are mentions of xenophobia, of anti-Blackness, of personal traumas related to immigration and things. So please do bear in mind that I speak very honestly and openly about these themes as I'm proceeding from here. Right. Let's go to the next slide. So the reason I wrote this book is that my entire life has been a struggle song. Where do I belong? Where on earth do I belong? And so the question of belonging tied up with who am I, and all of the identities that are foisted onto me are led me, throughout my life to really enter inquiry about what is belonging and how is it linked up with my identity and what is identity. So I grew up to be an educator and teacher about these themes. Let's go on to the next slide. Yes, the next slide. There we go. What if the marginalized did not marginalize? Let's go there. Thank you so much for assisting me with this so that folks can read as I read. I hope you can hear me okay. So the question that I wanted to begin with, and it's an inquiry that perhaps you, if you haven't with you, that you might also jot down some free writing thoughts about, what if the marginalized did not marginalize? What if we did not bleed our wounds of unbelonging all over each other? What if the wounds and scars we know did not turn into weaponized oppressive behaviors? What if we honored our moral obligation to heal fully? And then I cite Ali Henney, who is a teacher to me when it comes to anti-racism. She'll have a book coming out next year. And she says anti-racism is not work. Some folks do not have the privilege to clock in and out of survival. And I really held that, to heart. And then I wrote an invocation for anti-racism. The book is written in partial verse. It is written in meditations. It is written in open-ended inquiries. So you'll notice that as we go along. So this is my invocation prompted by Ali Henney. Anti-racism is a way of life. It is not a sign in my front yard. It is not a neat reading list. It is not a checklist. It is a practice. It is a mindset. Most of all, it is a heart set. I vow to exert constant effort and willingness to grow as I commit to this ongoing daily work, daily learning, in a world where systemic and pervasive anti-Black racism persists. Heart set will not rest. Let's go on to the next page. So then I wonder about living in America, and I have lived in the sacred lands, known, as Turtle Island, for about 32 years as a guest. And Connie will ask me later about why I continue to be a guest here, so I'll hold that story for later. And so I also proceeded to write some affirmations for living in America. And they're preceded by, what does it take to cultivate anti-racism as a heart set? The virtues or the qualities needed, I identified as dignity, humanity, humility, reciprocity, community, and solidarity. And so throughout the book, I come back to these words. And today the word of tonight is humility. So I will read about that shortly, but affirmations for living in America, and I do not capitalize America. That is also a controversial decision. Black lives matter. Black lives must matter most. Unless and until Black lives matter, no lives matter. Black liberation is human liberation. Black humanity is humanity. And then I cite our Tony K. Bambara, and I notice, so when you see words that are in the style here, our Black kin remind us time and time and again that their minds, souls, and humanity matter. Do we listen? It's almost like a journal entry on my part. So throughout the book, I embed multiple kinds of things and styles, from semi-poetics to citations. Tony K. Bambara says, revolution begins with the self, in the self. We'd better take the time to fashion revolutionary selves, revolutionary lives, revolutionary relationships. And I feel like that's what we're here to do together. let's go on to the word of the day, cultural humility. And so I really noticed that in anti-racism, when the conversations happen, that it's very much a black and white conversation. And I identify as a person of the global majority. I identify as they see-ish, which is a term in South Asian languages to refer to people from the South Asian subcontinent. And then I qualify it with an ish because I was born and raised on the African continent. Now I live in the sacred lands of the Muskogees. So I use the ish qualifier to question some of these identifiers. And so I really wanted to offer some perspectives in this book called Unbelonging, of a person who grew up with the kinds of identifications and locations that I did. What might I bring to a conversation around anti-racism, which continues to center white folks in many ways, and also continues to center the comfort of white folks in many ways, and is also a conversation here in the United States that's very much about Black folks and white folks, but well, what about the global majority folks? Do we have a responsibility? Do we have anything to contribute or to serve when it comes to doing the heart work and heart labor from which I choose not to rest, of anti-racism? So I invoke cultural humility, and you see a word there next to cultural humility, and that's the Punjabi word for humility. And cultural humility is I cite Cynthia Ferranda as an Indigenous scholar, thinker, writer, activist, who really is the first person that I knew of to use that term, but there may be others who have used it. So what might it mean to practice cultural humility towards Black folks? Now, I'm in community with Black folks. I am married into a Black family, and I am the parent of Black children. Again, Connie will ask me some questions later, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. So that is what I'm bringing this question from that lived experience of being a mother of Black children and a partner and community member to Black folks. At home in Gaborone, cultural humility would mean declining the oppressive practices taught by colonizers of treating all Black Africans as servants. When brown and white Africans act like the bosses of all Black folks, a part of me screams out loud about this humiliation. Where is the humility towards the keepers of this land we inhabit? At home in Decatur, sacred lands of the Muskogee Creek, cultural humility would mean learning the true history of America. Cultural humility would mean that we non-Black folks unlearn the colonizer ways of divide and conquer. We would refuse to be model minorities who benefit from the subjugation of Black folks. Cultural humility would mean that we do not take space. Cultural humility means that we unlearn the white adjacent ways we have adopted. Cultural humility invites us to relearn how to center the stories and narratives and histories of folks who built this land with unfathomable resourcefulness despite enslavement and ongoing systemic injustice. Cultural humility means to abstain from employing the catch-all category people of color selectively in ways that erase Black folks. Cultural humility opens doors instead of gatekeeping. Cultural humility is to own up to the ways we are complicit in the erasure of and systemic violence towards Black lives. Cultural humility requires that we refuse to be color blind. Cultural humility is to know without a shadow of a doubt that we can never fully know what it means to be raised Black in America. Cultural humility is to honor and compensate the labor of Black folks. Cultural humility is to see that there are as many ways to be Black as there are stars in the night sky. Cultural humility makes way for us to be actively anti-racist instead of passively non-racist. In essence, cultural humility is akin to a deep spiritual practice in which we non-Black folks recenter the humanity, resilience, and power of Black folks. It is a stance of opening ourselves to learning, unlearning, and relearning. Cultural humility is a prerequisite to solidarity. These are questions that I offer to all of us here to really think about in light of what I have shared about cultural humility, as well as about anti-racism being heart set. These are questions that I invite each of you to hold on to, and at some point we might debrief and consult together. Who is my community? How do I create belonging to community? And how did I learn to be in community? And the reason I link it up to community is because, to me, that's a word, and I credit bell hooks for that, that really invokes, our collective responsibility across races, across cultures, across languages, across nations, to be in collectives together. So I use that word community, and the citation for that, the definition of what I mean by community, goes to bell hooks. So the entire book, in essence, is in this vein. A lot of reflections, a lot of inquiries, a lot of questions. There are some research prompts throughout as well. And towards the end of the book, I say, well, as far as community and belonging, it may not exist. So, there is such a thing as linguistic activism, and there is a wonderful poet, Noor Hindi. She's a Palestinian poet, and that's what she does when she talks about Palestine, is that she says the liberation of Palestine isn't real yet. And yet in her book, in her poems, all she does is write the liberation. And so I speak belonging in this book, even though the book is entitled Unbelonging. What I do is I do not live belonging. I speak the languages of belonging. And then I always ask myself all the time, when I am trying to cultivate spaces of community and belonging, what is the lexicon of belonging? It is the language of justice. And I have spoken and written and woven and embroidered these words into every page of this book. And Connie, now we'll go to questions.
Okay. Thank you so much, Gayatri. I love your beautiful book and the wonderful and meaningful work you do. And I'm going to pose a few questions to you. And also I would like to invite audience members to please put their questions in the chat. So my first question to you is, I'd love to hear more about the origin story of this book and how you came to decide about how to write about identity and belonging.
So thank you, and thank you again for affirming the book so much. It's published by a very small press, and as you can imagine, it was really unconventional, right? I write in multiple languages. I write in a style that one is not used to reading. I set out to write the kind of book that I had always wanted as a resource when I was a teacher and a professor. So I used to teach first-year college students about global learning, right? This was their first global studies course, and I was always looking for resources. What do I assign to them? Do I find some novels that they can read? And I was constantly curating this material and always searching for it, and coming up short sometimes. And so I started to curate some of these materials, and that's where the quotes are from. And then it was my lifelong kind of search. It's like being a seeker for understanding that led me to write this book too, because I journal a lot, as you can tell from the style of the book. And I also set out to write a book that would be an offering in this, conversation around anti-racism, around identity and belonging, but also in a way that would be unexpected. There are books that intend to inform you, and then there are books that make you really feel and think. And I really wanted to come from a feeling and thinking, think deeply, feel kind of a space, because that was the way that I used to come to the classroom with my co-learners as well. We would just have these conversations. We would learn an interactive conversation. So that shows up on these pages. And so that's kind of the background of the book, is I mostly created it for co-learners who were, one of the first units in a course on global studies or ethnic studies, yeah, or even gender studies is on identity. And so this was my offering to those, that kind of possible literature that folks could draw upon.
Yeah, that really came across. I wanted to let you know, and I felt like a co-learner with you, so I appreciate that. Um, you write about colonialism and decolonization, and I was wondering if you could share more about how colonialism impacted you and your family and your process of decolonizing your mind.
You know, it's an ongoing journey, right? So decolonization is an ongoing theme that I come up with in the book. And in fact, this year, when I was really stopping to think, well, 2022, what was something that I was constantly pining for or feeling like was part of my reflections? And it was this, whether, the monarch of an empire passed away and then whatever happened, there were so many things, or whatever, the protests happening in Iran, the ongoing fascism all over the world, like whenever it is, my one thing is, it all boils down, it comes back to colonialism, right? So in my family, I talk about how part of sort of the anti-oppression work, the healing work, however you want to say it, or the decolonization work, in many ways, decolonization of the mind and spirit and the heart is healing, right? So it's like healing work. And that work is so necessary for people like myself in particular. I have heritage in what is now Pakistan, and my ancestors, lived in places now known as Pakistan, and colonial violence was directly responsible for why there was a splitting in 1947 called a partition. So I talk about that. And, growing up, I've always felt that sense of being partitioned, right? Because my relatives and my parents and my elders never really spoke about that direct historic event and its ongoing intergenerational traumatic responsibility for healing, that was a mouthful, that comes with that. So, colonialism isn't a theoretical thing for me, and decolonization isn't a theoretical thing for me. It's just a part of my existence, right? So that's one example. Another example is that, for example, the countries, in Africa, right? So there was a conference in Berlin, and in that conference, they decided there would be 54 nations carved up, and, no representatives from, the lands of Africa were there to decide there. And those borders continue to be the ones that we still observe and wave our flags and identify with. And I kind of have complicated feelings about that, because those allegiances, especially to nation, are really rooted in colonial mentality and colonial violence, which is present to this day, right? So it doesn't matter what you ask me about, I probably will link it to colonialism. And every time you ask me a question, I might read you a little excerpt from the book as well. So since there are captions, this one isn't in the slides, but, I really want us to, I cite Ngugi wa Thiong'o and Paulo Freire, two writers who really speak about decolonization in meaningful ways that have really informed my own ways of thinking and being about this. And so I talk about internalized colonialism. So here's what I say. On page 120, I say, subjects like me are objects of colonial intervention. We often consume ideologies, practices, and belief systems that perpetuate harm against ourselves and others. Often we learn how to be colonial subjects through Western style schooling. Schooling colonizes our minds, bodies, and spirits. The legacy of colonialism is alive. Decolonization has many meanings. It is not an event. To me, it is a holistic process. It means redressing the damage to our cultures and ideas as much as to our lands and histories.
That's beautiful and very moving. You shared a frightening experience at the airport when you were going to college. Would you be willing to share about that incident to the audience and also talk about your strategies for dealing with racist people in racist environments?
Oof, thank you for asking that question. But oof, I may not do justice to that question, but so one of the reasons that I came to the US is to pursue higher education. So you see how invested I am in that colonialism. I am definitely a colonial subject, striving to decolonize constantly. And so it was the pursuit of higher education that brought me here. I had a full scholarship to the University of Chicago, and this was in the late 80s, early 90s. Apartheid government was still, in power in South Africa, and I lived right next door to South Africa. Many of the exiles from apartheid South Africa who were revolutionaries in the African National Congress were my teachers and colleagues and people I went to school with. And so in that context, that previous year, the senior year of my high school experience, I had traveled a lot. I had traveled because to this day, the exams that were assigned to me, so this is how colonized we were and still are, came from Cambridge University. So Cambridge decided what me and all of us needed to know to prove that we were educated enough to pursue higher education. And so having grown up all my life, I had never been to Europe. And so my senior year, part of the fact that I was studying French language and culture meant that I went to study French. I had an Indian passport at the time because my parents were originally from India, and all these years we had lived and been born and raised on the African continent, but I did not have a passport that said so. So can you imagine all of the layers of complexity? I had also been to Israel that year. I had been to England that year. I had been to Paris that year, and I had also been to India that year to visit my grandmother. All of those stamps were in my passport. So I am on my way to the United States to study, and with a scholarship, with a F1 visa that says I have permission to enter the United States and that I have funding to do so. All of the paperwork that went through, I had passed my TOEFL exam to prove that I could speak English so that I could come. I had done all of that. And I was en route, and this was in days before WhatsApp and before, my parents were so brave to put me on planes to go to all these places by myself. They really were. I thank them for that. And so I arrived in Brussels, and I made the mistake of letting on to the immigration officer that I understood French, and I spoke in French. And oh my, did his red ding, 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 ding alarm bells go off. And I was interrogated for hours on end in a back room by multiple officers who had all, speaking to each other, accused me of espionage because of all of these stamps in my passport. How could a brown-skinned person be speaking in fluent French and have been to all of these countries that I just mentioned and have a passport from India and is headed to Chicago? What on earth is happening here? Surely I was a spy. So in my family to this day with my teenage children, I joke about the fact that I have the skill set and the profile of an international spy. So let me read to you a little brief excerpt about this that I wrote on page 122. So they saw me as a spy. They did not see me as a global traveler. They did not see me as a curious youth. They were stumped by my passport and the stamps it held. The Inquisition, with no parent to call or stranger to assist me, lasted several hours. When I arrived at my hotel, I was too fatigued to explore. I admired the architectural beauty from afar, as I suspected I would not enjoy this place up close. I smelled the stench of xenophobia lurking in European finery. Did I sample the chocolate? I do not recall. If I did, it was not memorable. And from this grueling experience, I learned to never be too keen to speak French or reveal how much I understand to folks who hold privilege. I have now become the person who eavesdrops on conversations in multiple languages: French, Hindi, Punjabi, Kiswahili, Setswana, even Farsi and Spanish, with a straight face, not revealing my comprehension. I do not reveal how much I follow and how much I wish to join these conversations. I listen. So I share more about this, but you had a very important question to ask me, for which I want to just say, I don't know how one uh, braves experiences and spaces of racism, right? Like, would you rephrase that question and re-ask it of me? Because I want to make sure I tackle that part, not just this experience.
Sure, and I just wanted to call out two responses from Dr. Ruha Benjamin, to who we owe you being here today. So thank you, Ruha, for inviting Gayatri. And she wrote, "Gotta laugh to keep from crying," and "Too much accomplishment is a threat." And
All of that. And I
yeah.
internalized that at the age of 18. I had just turned 18 when I was entering the US as an international student. And what I must say is that, on the one hand, experiences like that really were like the fire, like in many, spiritual belief systems, they say with fire we test gold. And so I feel like the fires of racist oppression have tested me throughout my life. The fires of xenophobia tested my family so much that we left Tanzania to go to Botswana when everyone else went to either the UK or Canada or here to the US, when there was a movement for Black Africa is for Africa, Africa is for Black Africans only. So all of those things informed me, taught me a lot of cultural humility, since that is kind of, humility is our sort of word of the evening. So I think what it did teach me was humility, but also fortitude, and also understanding that there are many ways that my very existence is a threat. People like me are not supposed to exist. And yet there are millions of us all over the world. We're the people of the global majority. We are the diaspora of so many continents. And so this is the thing that has made me audacious. These kinds of experiences have made me audacious. So I don't really give any advice about how to cope with racist environments or whatever. I don't ever give that advice, because I'm a person who doesn't really conform, and I kind of clap back. And it looks lots of different ways. And this book is full of clapbacks.
Yeah, I appreciate that. The question I had asked is, talk about your strategies about dealing with racist people in racist environments, but I totally understand it's very individual, and yeah, you may be very open, but some people might feel like they have to hide themselves, or,
There are times in my life where I was, very muted, and it cost me. It cost me a lot in terms of my own well-being and my own authenticity. And so, at the moment, I'm just kind of in a place where I just exist and fully,
I'm happy for you. You're in that place. I'm happy for you. Yeah. You write very movingly about parenting Black children while being brown and understanding and overcoming anti-Blackness in our communities. I was wondering if you'd be willing to share more.
Absolutely. It's such an important part of my life. And it's also a very humbling part of my life. Right. So it's incredibly humbling to be the mother of Black children in America in this day and age. And, as much as Unbelonging is kind of my, struggle song, what I really had wanted for them was something, a rootedness. I wanted them to grow up with roots and to grow up with wings. And that's one of the many reasons why I stay in the US, close to Atlanta, where they have heritage. Their dad grew up here, their grandparents were from here, they all attended historically Black colleges. And so, both my biological children have roots and heritage here in Georgia. And that's one of the reasons why I raised them here, to be Black people who knew who they are, right? This was really important to me. And as the brown mother, it's then a privilege. It's a privilege to then learn enough to be able to hold space to parent children who understand who they are in this world. So one of the functions of white supremacy is to make us choose only one identity. Okay, so we can really link it up to dominant culture, white supremacy culture that forces us to identify as only one thing. Well, I'm a multicultural, multilingual, multinational, multi-faith person, and I can't check just one box. And I write a couple of verses about that in the book, and neither can my children. And so it was kind of this thing of raising Black children to understand all of themselves, understanding that they have heritage in pre-partition Punjab, and yet they have heritage in the people who, built this land, and that they have, they have First Nations, indigenous ancestors also. So that's an ongoing thing, right? They're teens. They don't necessarily want to hear from me. So the community at large has a great role to play in parenting children who are multi-identified like they are. And I'll read you one small verse. This is a verse called Mother of Black Children, and it came to me on Tamir Rice's birthday. So, the extended ongoing systemic and real cultural violence towards Black children is something that just hits really close to home. And so when Tamir Rice's birthday comes, I remember. It's like it's a part of my memory. And so on June 25th, on Tamir Rice's birthday, I wrote this verse, and I started with Tamir Rice would have celebrated a birthday today. Antoine Rose, at 17, was laid to rest on this day. Black lives extinguished, eliminated by a racist system built on committing the erasure and purging of Black and Indigenous people and people of color. Where is the freedom to live, to breathe, to be? Last week, we marked Juneteenth. When I wrote this, it was 156 plus years of freedom for Black folks. Do we celebrate emancipation while we face annihilation? I birthed a child 15 years ago. Well, it's now almost 18. Named him Freedom. I beseech the heavens for a name befitting a Black brown child born in America. Freedom. Azad. Where's the freedom? Cry the mothers of all the Black Indigenous children of color. How on earth do we birth and raise free children in a world hell-bent on extinguishing their life force? On this day, I embrace all the mothers, mourning our children's stolen lives, as we pray that one day freedom comes. So that was the verse I wrote. It's a grief-filled journey, right? It's very humbling, and it's a grief-filled journey of holding space in a world that really isn't conducive.
Yeah, I totally empathize, and it's a very powerful poem. Would you share more about the role of addressing anti-Blackness and building cross-racial solidarity?
Yes. So, if there was like one thing that I really wished people would take away from this and sort of I created this book very much as a conversation tool. So even the last section of the book is, all about conversations and reflection prompts and such. And if there was one thing that I really had wished people would ask me about, it is this. So thank you. Thank you for honing in on that and knowing that that was one of the purposes of writing this book, was to invite us to really consider what Black-Brown solidarity looks like, right? It's not a book just about the grief of raising Black children. There's so much joy in it too. There's so many clapbacks and audacity and hope and all of those things. So I wanted this book to evoke, right, as I said to you a few minutes ago, that the purpose of the book was to make you feel things and rethink things, not necessarily to know things. And so the conversation around Black Brown solidarity. So to me, I invite us to really consider how all of the systems of oppression are interlocked with one another. And I think that many of us who might identify as brown or be labeled as brown, because not all of us take that as an identifier, the people of the global majority, however we identify, that many of us really have internalized a white supremacist mindset, right? And most of us learned it from school, in which if the world is black or white, and that's kind of how white supremacist culture works, right? Whiteness culture is like that, then we don't really have a place in it, but we have to choose a side. Right. So many of our children who grow up here without the lexicon, without that sort of being made obvious to them, they pick it up. It's in the water. It's in the air. It's in the curriculum. It's in all of the places that make it so normalized. So part of what I'm really invoking here is for us brown folks to really question, interrogate ourselves, and to have a truthful reckoning about the part that we play in being complicit in the violence against our Black kin. And those are the parts of the book that get me the most, what's the word I'm looking for? Pushback, but I'm being really like gentle. But those are the parts of the book that really ruffle feathers, right? Because this is not an easily digestible book. I kind of lay out a lot of things in a really matter-of-fact way. And one of the things that I say on page 185 is, actually, let me read a different one. Let me read, what is the karma? What is the karma? We use that word a lot, and it's such a common word that has been appropriated from, South Asian languages. What is the karma of brown folk in settler colonialism? That's a question. That's a big question. And I don't necessarily have the answer, but prior to that, I don't know if you can see it, but I have a bubble. What? I have a bubble in which I invite the reader to discuss oppression Olympics, performative allyship, woke washing, and slacktivism. So I invite us to think about that. And then I say, oppressive behaviors seem to always cut and wound deeper when they are inflicted by folks who share identities with us. So this really comes before me asking, well, what is the karma of brown folk in settler colonialism, right? Bury the model minority myth, refuse to be a weapon against Black America, refuse to erase indigenous truths, refuse to ally with whiteness, pay the price of refusal. That's it. It's like 1, 2, 3, 5 lines. Now, I could talk on this for like 6 hours, but I try to distill, and sort of each of the pages, I try to take a lot of things that I would have talked to my students about in hours, and we would have read multiple articles, and I tried to distill them into something to sort of plant a seed for us to then pop later and converse with our co-learners with. So that's part of my answer to your inquiry, is that there is work to be done in building solidarity. It is a responsibility. It is timely. It is long overdue. And part of that work involves coming to terms and having a truthful reckoning in the part we play in the ongoing anti-Blackness that's systemic and structural. And unless we can do that with cultural humility, going back to cultural humility, we're not going to get anywhere. Then it's just words. Then it's like selectivism, performative allyship, and woke washing. So I give us all the clues on that page to have this conversation. The clues are there.
Do you mind repeating it one more time, those 5 things one more time?
And I'm sure there are more.
Yeah.
And there are so many learned people in this virtual room, Dr. Ruha Benjamin included, who might add to that list. These are just a few that I came up with, and I tried to be brief. That was another, like people like me, it's like I could write a really long thing much easier than I could write 5 lines. But what is the karma of brown folk in settler colonialism? Bury the model minority myth deep down, like, more than 10 feet. Maybe I should rewrite it. I should rewrite it as burn it, set it aflame. But at the time I wrote it, I wanted to bury it. Refuse to be a weapon against Black America, right? And most of us don't refuse that. Most of us are happily concede to being a weapon against our Black kin, whether it's in the boardroom or in the library or, with our colleagues at work or, what have you, our students. We just do so much harm. Refuse to erase Indigenous truths. Okay, and there's a whole section in this book in which I talk about how I could easily be a settler immigrant, right? So refusal to bury Indigenous truths. Whew, I'll talk to you about that as why I still don't have a passport to stay here. Refuse to ally with whiteness and pay the price of refusal. That last one is really where most of us resist, because most of us are not willing to pay that price because a white supremacist system structure rewards us for being anti-Black. And we need to tell the truth about that and then fix it.
Ruha wrote, that list will keep us busy for a couple of generations.
So and I cite Audre Lorde a lot here. I cite Bell Hooks a lot here. And Audre Lorde tells us about master's tools, right? Mm-hmm. So refusal, and that's why I kept using refuse, because I also used very indigenous, like Punjabi and like, African ways of communication in this book. So like in the cultural humility verse, I said it over and over again, like that's something that's very normative in languages outside of English. So I really did try, even though I communicate in English in this book for the audiences that would have access to it, like refuse also was a repetition, because refusal is not a master's tool. That's the last thing the master wants. So I invoke that too. I invoke refusal.
Yeah. And Jamila said that she loves that line so much.
I love you, Jamila.
Okay. You mentioned that you continue to keep your Botswana passport. Would you be willing to share why you keep it?
I refuse to be co-opted into American empire. I mean, I could give you a long answer, but it makes and I pay the price. Okay, so this last week when I was messaging you back and forth, and thank you for all the emails and the warmth with which you have helped me prepare to be here in the space with you. And I have truly enjoyed this correspondence in preparing for tonight. And I thank Dr. Ruha Benjamin again for that introduction and for making this possible and for trusting me to be in the sacred space with you all. So here's the thing. I am trying to renew. I have been without a passport all year. So if, God forbid, divine forbid, something happens to my family in Botswana, they still live there. I'm still the only one here as a guest on Turtle Island. Should something happen, I can't get on a plane to go see them. So I am paying the price. The thing is that refusal will cost you. And over again, when I have said to myself, would it be easier to renew my green card, which also expired this year, by the way. So I had that terrifying experience earlier this year of not only having no passport, but also being undocumented for a minute. But in those moments of angst, could I just naturalize? I could, but I don't. And, there are people who gaslight me for that choice, right? Like, naturalize already. You live here. Well, yes, it comes with a sacred responsibility, but also when I refuse to erase Indigenous truths, I know that I really don't want to be a settler immigrant. Like, really, I want to live my life and make the choices that align with what I'm saying. It's not just words for me. So yes, my life is more difficult because I refuse to naturalize, but also I'm the kind of person who reads the fine print. Have you read the fine print? If you had American passports, You were born into them. You never had to do this. But if you naturalize, you have to take the oath of allegiance to this country. You have to answer whether you are sympathetic with Marxist ideologies. If you look at my bookshelf, I would have to lie to take the oath. No, really. I'm a sympathizer with Assata Shakur. She lives in Cuba. She hasn't been back. So if I'm living true to my words, then I really can't naturalize. So there's that part too. So there's the short answer and the long answer. It's really complicated. I'm so tangled up in all of this, but I'm trying. I'm trying to be a human that lives up to my beliefs.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And Shelley wrote, "Have you read the fine print?" question. And then
I have. I read it again this week in preparation for today because you asked me that question. I was like, what was my answer again? I went back and read the fine print, and it tells you that I would have to take up arms to defend this country, that I could never, defend another country that's at war with this country. I'm like, hello, I'm a person of the global majority who has a lot of empathy with Cuba. So unless I lied, I really can't take this oath.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Matt wrote, "That refusal is such a powerful witness for your children and very admirable."
Oh,
And
they saw me get on a plane all masked up, and I was the only one masked on the plane, and go to the Botswana embassy. And then they said, oh, it will take time. I'm like, oh, when a bureaucrat tells you it will take time, I'm like, could somebody pray up on my mother so that she is safe and well until I get to see her, right? She still lives in Botswana as my sibling.
and Linda said, "You have my gratitude for taking the stand and maintaining it even at a disadvantage."
Oh, my word, it's so hard. Trust me, there are days when I'm like, let's just do this thing. No, I can't do it.
And Ted wrote, "Could you not renew your Botswana passport?" I'm a little confused, but I don't.
Oh, I can, but the paperwork involved, because it expired, and the fact that there's only one embassy for all of the Americas, and the documents have been stolen lately. So I actually had to physically go to the embassy. I'd been trying to get it renewed all year long. And short of me personally going and filling up and showing up there, to be told, you let your passport expire. You should take your Botswana citizenship seriously. It's really a privilege. I was like, I know, Ma. I really know. Yes, Ma. I know that so much, which is why I'm here. And so it will take time. Bureaucracy takes time, and the time I can't speed things up when it comes to how they will need to verify my identity and all the steps it will take. So it will take time, sir. Ted, it's not going to be like that. And by the way, the application process is not even electronic. It's still paper. Thank you, colonialism. Those forms are vested in colonial practices, and they still exist, and we still use them.
And my next question is, in all your many travels, where was the closest to racial harmony that you've ever lived? And can you tell us more about what you appreciate about that place?
That place doesn't exist. But I'll tell you where it does. It could be this virtual room that we're in, right? The reason I continue to be the way that I am and show up in spaces is that that place actually may not be a geographical place. That place could be an imagined place. And if you haven't read a book that I really love, I really recommend imagining that place right here.
Yeah.
And the thing is that that abolitionist future can be the now, of that place in which there's racial harmony and that togetherness and that unlearning and that respecting of each other's humanity. And fundamentally, all of the questions that you are asking me are really about recognizing our fundamental humanity and cultivating that. And there are places throughout my life that have taught me that, or else how could I even exist? How could I even be possible? How could I even have survived? How could I have, looked the face of that, immigration officer in Brussels down and not be fearfully brought to tears? I didn't cry in that interrogation. I never cried. Why? Because there are people, ancestors, forces, divinity that surrounds me and makes it possible for me to be in that space. So that space is actually not a real place. It's not a geographical place. It's certainly not a country. It's certainly not the United States. But that space is possible because it's happening now as you and I speak, right?
Yeah.
We create it in the moment. We dream it up. We conjure it up. And Dr. Ruha Benjamin gave us lots of ideas on how to build that space.
Yeah, her book is fantastic. I love it so much. So,
Such a gift.
okay. And did the process of writing this book change you?
I hope so.
Yeah.
I,
How
I
did it change you?
well, in many ways, it has made me realize how much I still need to learn and know. Right. So it has been humbling. It's been a really like humble humility is the word of the night. It's really humbled me in ways where I'm constantly looking at it going, oh, I should rewrite that. Oh, scratch that. What was I thinking? So I'm constantly like reimagining and relearning. So the book has really continued to be a source of humbling learning. That's how it continues to change me. It also makes it possible for me to be in this room with you. I don't know if you would have had a reason to invite me to speak with you had this book not existed, had I not done the labors for many years to find a press that would publish such an unconventional thing. So it changes a lot of things. And it also enheartens me because it gives me reason to be in these virtual spaces where we can have these conversations. So those are some of the ways in which it continues to be a blessing and a gift and a teacher to me.
Yeah, thank you for birthing it into the world. And it's so beautiful and powerful. And I wanted to invite members of the audience to share their questions. And again, I wanted to thank Dr. Ruha Benjamin for inviting you. And Ruha, I don't know if you want to speak, say anything.
Linda asks how we can get a copy of the book.
Yeah. You could go to bookshop.org and search for Unbelonging by Gayatri Sethi, and you see the cover in the thing, and you could find several ways to source it. There are some independent bookstores that carry it, but because it's a small press, and our press was published during last summer, at the height of challenges related to pandemic as well as sort of economic downfall. So my press is suffering. They may not reprint it. There are very few copies of it available. You can go to Amazon and it is most easily accessible there. Although my personal preference is that you find an independent bookstore by going on bookshop.org.
Please feel welcome to either put your questions in the chat or raise your hand, or you can unmute.
While we're waiting for a question, I just wanted to say there was so much I identified with in your book. And I told you that my mother-in-law is Indo-Guyanese. And so she really felt the impact of colonialism, having to her family be transported as indentured laborers to Guyana. And I remember, oh, there's a question for you. Linda wrote, what was your first reaction to anti-Black racism when you came to the United States?
You know what the United States has always done really well is it has a great PR team. It's a great marketing thing. So young people all over the world, including my nephew who just came to study in the US this past fall, they get fed a vision of America that is untrue. And I was somewhat taken in by that, but somewhat not, because in the 70s, my father came to study down the street from you all at Rutgers for his master's degree. And when he lived in New Jersey, he wasn't able to get permission for my mother and for me, at the time my brother had been born, to be allowed to the US. He had to go through a lot to prove that they should be permitted to come with him, and he was a graduate student. During that time, he rejected all of that paperwork and said he was going back to raise his children in East Africa, in Tanzania, where we lived. So I had a precedent for having reasons to question the anti-Blackness because my father was just like me. He was like, y'all can keep your paperwork. I'm going back to Africa. I'm not raising my children here. But he did that in 1976 after having lived in New Jersey for 2 years. He was like, over it. And so I thank him, and I think of him a lot. But also, I grew up in the shadow of apartheid South Africa. So when I first came here, to answer your question head on, I said, oh, this is apartheid. When I landed on the south side of Chicago to go to college in 1990, I said, oh, I know what this is. This is apartheid. So it wasn't shocking to me. It was familiar to me. The part that was because that's not the image you see in, the global media and what's sold to you about this being the land of the free and being a melting pot. So I was already a person who questioned things. So when I landed here, I was like, oh, apartheid. Okay, gotcha. I know what this is. So.
As you were reading and sharing your poems, I just wanted to note that you probably missed all the sort of emoji reactions of fire and hearts that people were.
I did. I did. I don't multitask well, especially because my vision is a little impaired. But yes, thank you for that. And thank you again, Kim, for being the magical force guiding the presentation along.
My pleasure.
Sindhu wrote a question. First, she said the veneer is thick. It takes a lot to cut through it. And then she said, what was the position of brown people in apartheid South Africa?
So there was a racial hierarchy. And again, the Indo-Guyanese people are really familiar with this too, because the folks who were brought from the subcontinent of Asia to East Africa, to as far away as Guyana and Trinidad, and to South Africa, my sister by marriage, who married my brother, is from Durban, South Africa. And there, her entire family is of Indo descent. They don't know where exactly on the subcontinent. They were indentured so many hundreds of years ago. And she and her family have been the teachers to me in sort of understanding that. And throughout my childhood, I also learned that the role in the hierarchy was that the British had brought people of Indian descent to Africa to teach the indigenous Africans how to be good servants, right? So we had a history of being colonized in India in particular for so long, that the reason was not just to get a workaround to, sort of like abolition of slavery. That was part of the reason. But the other thing was to enforce a racial hierarchy. And so in the post-colonial era all over Africa, many countries really wanted the Indians and the white Africans gone. And I lived through that too, because in the late 70s, that was the sentiment in East Africa, and why many of our community members who had nowhere to go, fled. They left everything and fled to either England or to the US. But my father was thick skin, right? As Sindhu said, my father said, we're going to Botswana. We're not leaving Africa. We're not going back to America. I said, no already. So my father, I think, is one of the reasons why I am the way that I am. And so he was the reason that I understood that the role of brown people in the racial hierarchy was to be oppressors to Black people. That's very clear to me throughout my life, whether it's on the African continent or here in the US, that is our role in the racial hierarchy. And most of us are complicit in it and continue to play that role without questioning it. We do harm.
Thank you. That leads in really well to Caroline's question. When you say refuse to be a weapon against Black America, can you tell us ways in which you have observed non-African Americans weaponizing their other characteristics versus Black America?
Oh my word, that's such a loaded and deep and profound question. I don't know if I could do justice to that, but it really is in those intimate spaces, in those choices that we make, right? In the ways that we conform to what, the thing that all of the things that we do as immigrants to this land to play our role in the racial hierarchy. And there's so many, so last week was, a week and a half ago was an example, right? Is, okay, dear brown people, the thing known as Thanksgiving is a farce and a lie. Our indigenous kin, the Lenape, the Wanapong, all of them have told us time and time again that this is sacred land, this is unceded territory. That's not how it really went down. And here we are putting masala on our turkey and calling it Thanksgiving and flaunting it. Why? Who does it serve for us to be like that? We continue to play those roles, whether it's in those little subtle ways, or whether it's in really blatant ways. Systemically, as a group, brown America descended from South Asia has not had a track record of cross-cultural solidarity with Black folks and with indigenous folks, especially and they were called Indians by the settlers, and we're Indians. So should we not have some cross-cultural solidarity? We don't. We absolutely continue to enact erasures. And so those are just some of the things that continue to stay true and hurt my heart, really, because we do know better, but we refuse to do better. And that's a citation to Dr. Maya Angelou. Every day I'm like, we know better, but here we are serving up turkey with some garam masala on it and calling it decolonized. That's not it. We missed the memo. We didn't understand the assignment.
Caroline wrote thank you in all caps for that. So, and Jamila wrote a lovely note. I love your note about how we must create this places of deep radical care and harmony between each other and in ourselves, because there's no physical place in the world like that. I think encouraging us to imagine this place as something that lives within us, and therefore something that we can put into motion in the world, is a source of hope for change. It can help us to start to answer questions about what we can do when the institutions of harm feel too big. As you always say, it's integrity work.
It really is. Oh, bless you, Jamila. She keeps my hope alive.
It's a very beautiful comment. I was kind of hoping you would tell me, oh, this country is great, but no, I think it's not so easy, right?
It's not. And one of the other things that gets me a lot of pushback in this book is that I don't capitalize the A. And most people cannot fathom that there are people who really didn't come here with the intention of becoming settler immigrants. Like there really are. It wasn't in my plan to stay here, really, and I'm not enamored by it. In fact, I work really hard not to be co-opted. Really, it's just such hard work. Don't you think it would be easier for me to be like, yeah, okay, we'll just call it Thanksgiving too, or Friendsgiving, let's just rebrand it. But I'm not like that. I kind of have this refusal inside of me. And maybe it's all of the experiences like the person in Brussels throughout my life that have really just put a really deep sense of refusal inside of me, where I'm just like, I know what oppression feels like. I know what policing looks like. I know what, apartheid is. And no, just no.
Yeah, no, totally. I just wanted to clarify, when I said this country is great, I didn't mean America. I thought maybe you knew some country, Botswana maybe was like amazing or something. But
no, but I have such deep, and the middle part of this book is my love letter to the African continent, and I'm a child of Africa, and I just attribute so much of what I have learned about how to be in the world through Ubuntu and Butu and sort of expressions of humanity and care and community that I was taught as normative. And yet those societies are deeply colonized to this day. So, there's no ideal existing geography that I could reference us to.
yeah. Jamila put, a prayer sign and hearts and a star for you. And does anyone else have any other questions? Caroline writes, it's always easier to accept than refuse. Refusal brings the strength to be freedom fighters.
Thank you. Can we just channel that? More of that, more of that. And to sort of give that energy to all of the revolutionaries in the world who are currently fighting for a more just and free world. And I think mostly of the young people in Iran right now. I mean, every day I wake up and I think about them and I send them light and love and energy. Palestine too.
I really loved your sentence about how refusal is not one of the master's tools. That was very powerful.
It's not. And, like I have a bunch of what are master's tools, at some place in the book, and a list of those. And I used to teach that, in the women's and gender studies classes that I taught. We would study bell hooks and Audre Lorde at length, and all the Black feminists that I have cited here and given nods of great gratitude to. But part of whether we call it decolonizing, whether we talk about it as a rebuilding and a healing into an abolitionist world, whatever we call it, there are so many ways that we can frame it. Fundamentally, we're all talking about kind of this rebuilding of a world in which we center humanity. Our own and everyone else's, no matter who they are, no matter who they be.
Thank you so much. Anyone else have any other questions? Shelley wrote, there's one boat, we're all in it.
Thank you, Shelley.
Yeah.
Thank you, Caroline. Thank you, Christine.
Thank you so much for creating this space and this, Larry wrote, thank you, your honesty is a blessing.
Oh, I'll work at it. I kind of bring my uncensored self wherever I go. It doesn't matter whether it's a room in the library at Princeton that's virtual or whether it's the FedEx, where I go. I kind of bring my uncensored self in, and that's kind of a practice. And I think that's one of the things that I've also learned to practice over and over again.
Yeah, and Gayatri, I'd like to introduce you to Sindhu Zirasekar. She's one of our Not in Our Town board members, and she's done some tremendous work in our community with truth and transformation. So very grateful to Sindhu for her leadership. I'm going to say bye. Gayatri, do you have any last closing message you wanted to share?
Just a deep gratitude for all of you. Thank you for making time and sharing space. Thank you for being here, and thank you for receiving what I shared.
Thank you so much.
Sindhu, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sethi, for this inspiring discussion. And you're really an example of being so stalwart to your values. Coming from South Asia myself, I can relate to a lot of what you said, especially about the part of being complicit in white supremacy. So many awakenings here, unlearning to actively reclaiming our colonized mind, relearning with humility. This notion of cultural humility is new to me, and it's very nicely framed. Activism, to be actively being anti-racist versus being a pacific non-racist. Lots of good ideas here. And I really thank you for coming out here. It was really, and I love the last piece about the karma of brown folk, pending colonial secularism, right? Bury the model minority myth, refuse to be a weapon toward Black America, erasing indigenous truths and so on. So I'd like to thank you very much. Thank Ruha Benjamin and Connie as well as the NIOT team, Kim Dorman, for always doing such a fabulous job here. So I'd like to make a small announcement to the community. So really our learnings here today has set the stage for what I'd like to talk about. Many people in Princeton have reached out in different ways, asking for ways to participate in racial justice initiatives. So you may all want to consider the Truth and Transformation Committee. It's a small group of people from Not in Our Town. And our charter is really twofold, right? We want to acknowledge the truths of the indigenous histories, African American history in Princeton area, and then transformation. Transformation is about transforming our institutions to repair the injustices of enslavement, displacement, and then address ongoing systemic racism as well. And that includes all our institutions, education, health, housing, and so on. We work a lot with community partners like the Civil Rights Commission, for instance, on initiatives. For example, recently in 2019, some of our team members were instrumental in getting the Princeton community to pass a resolution to recognize the second Monday of October as the Indigenous Peoples Day. More recently, we worked with the Civil Rights Commission again to persuade the council to approve a resolution endorsing the New Jersey Reparations Task Force Act. And if this is passed by the New Jersey Assembly, it will pave the way to conduct research and develop preparatory proposals and recommendations to address the generational harm caused by New Jersey's role in slavery and its legacy. So we are currently working on changing the Princeton sign to they say settled in 1813. Hello, there were a lot of people before that who were here, right? The Lenape people, for instance. So if any of you are interested to join, please contact us at info@niotprinceton.org. I'll put it in the chat window as well. We love to expand our team. We can get a lot more things done. We have a lot more things on our plate to do. So, and you can hear more about Truth and Transformation in January session. We will be having a session dedicated to Truth and Transformation. So please join us. In January, it's going to be held on Tuesday, January 3rd, instead of the Monday of the month because of the holidays and the school closings and whatnot. Also, we have joined the Coalition for Peace Action and other organizations in a solidarity vigil against hate and bigotry. This is happening on Wednesday, December 15th from noon to 1 p.m. at Tiger Park in front of Palmer Square in Princeton. So I'll put that link in the chat as well. Please register. Please join us over there. Thank you so much, everybody. And thanks again, Dr. Sethi and Ruha Benjamin, Connie, all of you, Kim Dorman, and everybody who attended this call.
Thank you, everyone.
Yes, and thank you for coming this evening. Have a wonderful evening, everybody.
Thanks a lot.